when you say stroke is the best thing that happened to me, I think that gaining of that wisdom is probably the best thing that happened to me. And I think that it can only happen through something dramatic, whatever that is, whether
Yeah.
it be a stroke or something else. And so I really don't like motherhood statements like, oh, this is for the best, or, people that love telling you this and, have never had anything in their life. But I do like a much more nuanced conversation about the fact that there's only certain wisdom that you gain from horrendous experience.
This is Recovery After Stroke with Bill Gassiamis, helping you go from where you are to where you'd rather be.
Bill Gassiamis from recoveryafterstroke.com. This is episode 71 and my guest today is Hannah Derwent. Hannah is a mother of 2 young children and is living with an inoperable meningioma. According to WebMD, a meningioma is a tumour that forms on membranes that cover the brain and spinal cord just inside the skull. Specifically, the tumour forms on 3 layers of membranes that are called meninges. These tumours are often slow-growing and as many as 90% are benign. Now, just before we get started with the interview, I wanted to let you know about a free webinar that is available for you to download. If you go to recoveryafterstroke.com/webinar and click the download now button, I will send it to you directly to your inbox. The webinar was created for people on the road to recovery, and by watching it, you'll learn how to take action on your recovery now, how to build a vision for the future that will inspire you, and what to do when you're faced with hard decisions about your path forward. You'll also learn the importance of creating a supportive team around you and what people that the recovery journey should include, as well as how recovery after stroke coaching can help speed up your healing. So don't just be a stroke survivor. Download this free webinar at recoveryafterstroke.com/webinar and become a stroke thriver. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for waking up early and jumping on, making time for me.
Don't worry.
Tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
Well, it's curious. Well, I've listened to your podcast a little bit, and I don't have a stroke story like other people. Well, I do, but it's a very different story. So I was having, I found out I had a meningioma, which is a benign brain tumor, in my brainstem, which is the surgeon said you've probably got the best tumor in the worst spot. So if you're going to get a brain tumor, you probably want to get a meningioma, but you don't want to get a new brainstem. Anyway, I had never had surgery. I'm not scientifically trained. I had no knowledge. So he said, look, we can do surgery. On reflection, he was telling me how massive it was and how risky it was. But, I thought I was getting my wisdom teeth pulled out or something. I mean, I didn't really think that hard about the gravity of it. Anyway, so in May 2017, I had my craniotomy to debulk my tumor, they call it. So they don't always, especially if it's in a tricky spot, these kind of tumors, they don't always aim for 100% resection, they call it. So getting 100% out, they aim for enough to make sure that, so that you're not symptomatic anymore. So I was basically starting to get symptoms. I possibly had the tumor for 30 years, which means I had my kids with it. It means I went to uni with it. So they're not dangerous as such until they start interfering with nerves and the like. Anyway, so I had a 12-hour craniotomy.
Wow.
And at the 7-hour mark, I think what happened, I've been told many times, now I apologize if anyone is neuroscientifically trained, they can correct me, but what I understand is that there are blood vessels that feed tumors, are co-opted by tumors, and those can be sacrificed. So they can be they just cauterize them and they cut them off basically. So that in effect, they're cutting off the food supply to the tumor. But there are also blood vessels that go through the tumor to feed a part of the brain. And mine was the latter. So it was a vein draining away from the brainstem. And so you can't sacrifice it. If you sacrifice it, person dies. So, well, I think they die, I'm not sure. But anyway, so he was attempting to get more of the tumor, but to get more, he'd have to pick more of the tumor off the vein. And so he was taking it in tiny strands. The pathology report said it was all in strands, tiny strands. He took it, and unbeknownst to him, it was too, what do you call it, tightly connected to the blood vessel, and the blood vessel came too. So it perforated the blood vessel. Now, what I understand in craniotomies is that people bleed quite often, but it doesn't always cause a stroke. But it depends which blood vessel you get, and you can't tell. So they only really knew when the neurophysicist who's in the room said, we can't detect anything on the right.
Right here.
So, yeah, I think that's when they realized. So what they have to do when it's going through the tumor is they have to actually surgically seal it. It's different to cauterizing it.
Yeah.
So it's still there, but patched up.
Righto.
Yeah.
So you've gone through this 12-hour surgery, which you thought was like going to be like getting your wisdom teeth pulled out. No big deal.
Yeah. He said 5 hours and 10 days in hospital.
Yeah, cool. Before that, like, what were the symptoms you were experiencing that led you to end up?
Well, on reflection, I can think about this on reflection. So I was overseas for work from 2012, and then I had my operation in 2015. I think for the whole duration of that time overseas, I had chronic headaches. I lived on Panadol. I just thought everyone lived on Panadol. I didn't realize after I had my surgery, I was like, oh, people don't live in Panadol. I haven't had Panadol since my surgery.
Yeah, cool. Like, Panadol, for people who don't know, is just a painkiller, a very mild headache type painkiller.
Yeah, paracetamol.
Yep.
I had bad vertigo, so every time I lay down, the room would spin out, which I kind of ignored because it didn't affect me when I was standing. It only affected me when I was laying down. And actually, it was the vertigo that got me. So I started seeing a physio for the vertigo, and I think he fancied himself as quite the expert, which he probably was. And after 3 treatments, he said, Hannah, it should be getting better in someone your age. He said, I think you've got to explore this further. There's something physiologically wrong. To which I said, do you think I have a tumor? And he said, no, I don't think you have a tumor. Well, I did. And yeah, so the vertigo, the fatigue, the headaches, I started to get, so in the brainstem is your auditory nerve, your nerve for balance, your nerve for your voice, all these automatic functions. I started to get a really odd hearing in my right ear, my affected ear. But the thing that got me right at the end, because I think, the symptoms come on very slow, was the extreme fatigue. I was only 35 at the time. I was working 2 days. I'd cut right back at work. I thought I was developing some sort of autoimmune disease. And so I cut right back at work. I was eating ridiculously, because I used to get a lot of gut pain as well, which is very interesting in terms of the mind-gut connection. No one's ever acknowledged that, but miraculously, since my tumor's gone, I don't have gut pain. But the fatigue, got me in the end. Just, I was so tired, I could hardly get up, and I thought, what is wrong with me?
And you went to a neurologist, or?
Went to my GP. I actually changed GPs, so I was getting everything tested in 2016, except my brain. And then I changed GPs actually because I had to, because I was hardly going to work and I needed someone closer to my house. And he didn't pick it up the first time. He said, oh, your iron levels are probably low or something. But he said to me very critically, he said, if you feel worse, come back. So I did. I went back a week later and I said, I feel worse and it really hurts when I bend over. And he said afterwards, they never tell you until afterwards, he said that was a trigger because that indicates some sort of intracranial pressure.
Right.
And he said, I think we just need to maybe do an MRI to rule it out. And so he got it after 2, and I still see him because I trust him. Yeah, and he referred me to a neurosurgeon.
Yeah. See, sometimes our story about what we're experiencing can lead doctors down the wrong path, and we
Yeah.
end up going to I went to a chiropractor. You went to a physio. The chiropractor said to me, whatever's happening in your body and making your left side numb is not as a result of your back. That was the second time I saw him, because he said the numbness in your foot and in your leg is maybe something that's coming on in your spine, maybe some inflammation due to some damage that you've caused, because I had a property maintenance business. So I was doing heavy lifting, silly stuff like that. And then he goes, if you come back a second time, we'll check it out. If it gets worse, so I went back a second time and I couldn't feel my entire left side. And he immediately, within a minute, said, you need to go and see a doctor, go straight to the hospital. And I ignored it and I said, no, I can't do that. I'm working tomorrow.
Hmm.
So I when I tell that story, some people get really upset that the chiropractor should have known better and chiropractors can't treat everything, etc. But I had a 10-year history with this chiropractor. I
I think that was really good advice, though. I mean, that was
in the end,
like
it
what
was.
physio said, was like their experience, so they know when they see. And
Yeah.
the physio said to me, this pain should be referring, because I was getting headaches as well. I was seeing for two things, vertigo and headaches.
Yeah.
And he said, this pain should be referring. And he said, the fact that it's not referring up to your head at all means that there's something else physiologically wrong.
Yeah.
He actually said to me, he said, Hannah, there is something wrong and they just haven't found it.
Yeah.
So he was willing to draft a letter to the doctor, and he wanted me to push it. He said, look, they've got to look further and not just tell you that, it's all
in your head.
In your head. Which is nice.
Yeah, that's good. That's good that it ended up sort of being found the way that it was found. What's interesting, though, is that you said that you didn't think the vertigo when you were lying down was anything to be worried about, because it just happened when you were lying down.
Yeah. And it was funny enough, because when I was working overseas, so there's an Australian GP that we see over there. It was 2015. I'd actually come back to Australia for my brother's wedding, and I had shocking headaches, and I had a CT scan, which didn't show up anything, which is quite common when things are in the brainstem. If this was at the front of my brain, it probably would have showed in the shade of a mass. Anyway, it showed up nothing. And then I went back to my job overseas, and I went to see my GP for something, and she put me on the examination table. She was excellent. I really liked her. And I said, oh, just wait a sec. I'll just spin out for a sec. It always happens. And she said to me, oh, I'd be worried about that if you hadn't just had a CT scan. It was clear, wasn't it? And I was like, yeah, it was clear. And so we rolled on to the actual issue that I was there for.
Right.
But the thing with the brainstem is you need the fine slicing of the MRI imaging to show up. And maybe other parts of the brain too, I don't know. But so they serve different functions. So I think what she was actually probably looking for, the GP that I saw, who was not my regular GP because I had such bad headaches, she was probably just looking for bleeding.
Yeah.
Or the remnant of a clot or something like. Yeah.
You know what's interesting with CT scans and MRI? Because I had a CT scan too that didn't show the arteriovenous malformation, and that was around 18 months before the actual bleed.
Wow.
So there could have been a lot of preventative work done during that time. And what I feel like the CT scan is, I feel like it's old technology, which... Now, if you or someone you know has experienced a stroke and are in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind, like how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain these things to you, but obviously, because you've never had a stroke before, you may not know what question to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing the things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These are the 7 questions that I wished I had asked when I was recovering from my stroke. They'll not only help you better understand the condition that you have, they'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free. They haven't had the foresight to go, we're not using this anymore because it's old technology. And because the cost of MRIs is higher, they use it first and then they use an MRI. But I figured, shouldn't MRI use be the same as any technology? When it comes out at the beginning, it's expensive, but the more and more people will use it and the more it's needed, the cheaper the cost comes. But no, apparently not. So this, I think, is really silly that we use antiquated diagnosis tools, and I don't see that as being best practice. And I don't understand how it continues to go down that path. Maybe I'm wrong, and I have a friend who's a radiographer, and I'm going to ask him, because that's the first time that's entered into my mind to think about it like that. But it feels like they're using a 1920s car and they're expecting it to have air conditioning.
And I guess the problem is that brain conditions are sort of rare. So in some ways, you know, I mean, for us, it's our life. So of course it was crucial. But I guess they're weighing things up on a much more cutthroat kind of. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I don't blame them. I just wonder whether or not what I'm saying is something that other people are saying, other radiographers are saying, or other people wanting the diagnosis are saying. So doctors would be frustrated, I imagine, going, oh, we did a CT scan. Oh, crap, we missed that. Now we've got to do an MRI. Oh, here we go. Now we found it. And geez, wouldn't it have been better to do an MRI at the beginning?
My neurosurgeon was frustrated because, I mean, who knows? It might have made no difference. It was only 18 months. But he said, you know, if this had been found earlier, we might have been able to avoid surgery and just, you know, do other methods. They do radiation and stuff. And you could have actually avoided this whole disaster. I mean, there might have been other side effects, who knows, but this actual side effect.
Yeah. What did you wake up with? What deficits did you wake up with from surgery?
What did I wake up with? I didn't wake up like this. So it was massive. He came out and said to my family, look, it was small by blood standards because she was there, but it will be massive because of where it was. And he said, we'll know in the next 24 hours. So I think it was fairly touch and go. I think generally for the first 24 hours after a bleed, they don't really know if someone will make it or not. So because it's the brainstem, I woke up with, I was locked in basically. So I had no voice. I had no movement. My whole right side was paralyzed. I had no swallow. I couldn't swallow, so I was tube fed for 3 months. No voice, no talking, no swallowing, no moving, totally incontinent. Yeah, that's
a bit more dramatic than pulling a tooth.
Yes, it was pretty major. So I was locked in for probably. So I should say about waking up. Waking up. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear. Because I had the bleed, but I also had a 12-hour craniotomy. So I think I understand that even if you don't have a bleed, you wake up from a craniotomy very, it takes a while to come to.
Yeah,
So,
it took me a couple of days to get back into the space, into the room.
So I had, both, so I'm not sure. So, but it's like I woke up. I didn't, it's hard to explain, but I didn't even know that I was me, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I had this vague feeling of the I guess, but I was looking around like, I know that person. That's my mum. I know that man. That's my husband. What are they doing here? And what am I doing here? And why can't I move? Like I just had no concept. And I reckon the concept of myself and the full understanding of what had happened took months. So I didn't understand the connection between blood loss in the brain and loss of function, and the role of getting back function, which possibly was good, because once I realized that I was myself, I never entertained the possibility of not recovering. Ever. Ever. I never thought about it. And that wasn't a conscious decision. That was just like like this will be a blip, basically. Like, um, yeah. So this has been the process of, I mean, I had some spontaneous nerve recovery, like my voice came back spontaneously. Um, my swallow, to some extent, I did a bit, but my continence came back randomly. But the physical stuff has been, and my eye doesn't move. I've got sixth nerve palsy, which means that my left eye doesn't move left, which creates double vision. So I can see. I've learned a lot about the brain now. I can see because I have my optic nerve intact, but my eyes don't unify the image when they work together.
Yeah.
But your brain kind of, it's not like you ever see perfect again, but your brain adjusts to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah. Other people I've spoken to who are locked in on the podcast have said that it was terrifying because they woke up and immediately realized that how vulnerable they were. Was that a similar experience for you?
I think, yes, the vulnerability, but that came a bit later. I think at the very beginning, the sheer terror of not really understanding what was happening. So understanding, that's the problem with being locked in, because you have your full faculties, you understand, but you can't do anything. So when it comes to language, for example, like I never had a trouble constructing language, but I had trouble the mechanics of making my voice, kind of thing. So like if you put a whole lot of doctors in front of me and said, were these people in ICU, I could tell you who was in ICU and who wasn't. So I have full memory of who was there. I was having a lot of delusions. I thought everyone was trying to kill me. So every time they tried to put a cannula in me or something, I thought they're trying to do me in, basically. I had this one doctor say, I think he was questioning why I was still in ICU towards the end. And he said, why is she still here? And I thought she meant, like, hasn't someone
Got rid of her.
Yeah, got rid of her. So I think, the delusions lasted, well, that was a couple of weeks. So I was not moved out of ICU for a couple of weeks. So it wasn't until I moved out. I do remember it was really inappropriate when I was put onto the neurosurgery ward. I was put in with a man. I mean, he was 96, so he was pretty harmless, but he was, not full faculties there. So it was terrifying in some ways. And one day he came around the curtain because he could walk. He had something, he could walk. He was there for something else. And I just got terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, like if he tried to do anything, and I knew how long the nurses took to come, they took forever. I'd, be, luckily my husband was there, so we just kind of shoot them away. And I think it was pretty harmless, but
Yeah, but still, the thought, the idea, would it have been the same concern if it was a female?
No. So when I moved to the rehab ward, they only put me in with females, and that was fine.
Interesting.
That's what I think they should always do, no matter what. Especially, I mean, it was ridiculous. If someone is locked in, you might have some thought that they're feeling a little bit vulnerable. Like, I just think, and I think too, that doctors are mostly men, and men don't really understand the level of vulnerability that females feel anyway, let alone being locked in. I mean, you have a level of vulnerability even just walking down the street, even if you're perfectly able. And then put on top of that, being totally disabled, it magnifies it.
Men are a bit thick. Men can be a bit thick.
Well, we only know what we know.
But I think the issue is that I think the biggest issue is that they don't actually interview people like you later. this is what the biggest issue is. So nobody says, why don't we ask them a few questions about their experience?
It's
And
quite weird. I actually find it really bizarre. So the other day, anyway, I'll give you an example. The other day, I spent a lot of time in rehab. I spent 3 months in the hospital, and I spent about 18 months in outpatient rehab. And I'm still rehabbing, but now I do it myself, care of funds through the NDIS.
that's the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia.
Yeah. Anyway, I got invited to the hospital, the rehab hospital, the other day to talk about be a dummy, my new job, professional patient. But I love that you're just like a physical patient. No one kind of ever asks you to talk about what happened to you. They just want to use the fact that you have a weak arm, or like you're handy for the experts to learn. I mean, it boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went. They were doing a session on CMIT, which is constraint induced movement therapy, which is a lot of the idea that has come out of Norman Doidge and neuroscience like that. Now, I've done that privately, and my complaint to the occupational therapist was, why don't you offer this publicly? Anyway, I ran into her recently, and she said, "Oh, we are now. We've just they're always about a bit behind." And she said, "Oh, can you come in and do a workshop?" So I went into this workshop. Anyway, they were doing these activities on me, and I knew from my experience that they were doing the activities were too advanced. They had to tone it back a bit because I'd done this with my physio, and I said, I said to them at the end, I just offered my own expertise. I said, I think this is too advanced. I think you need to tone it back. I have this problem with my finger. You need to be aware of that, and you can't be perpetuating me doing an exercise incorrectly. That's really bad for the idea of neuroplasticity. And the physio kind of giggled and said, well, why don't we ask the expert? And looked up at the trainer. And I said, I am the expert. Ask me. And she kind of giggled. Like, that was funny. And I was like, how is that funny? Like,
Yeah.
I could tell you a lot about rehab now.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of learning comes from one place, and you follow a procedure and a process, and if we stick to that, we get an outcome, and we cookie cutter that, and we put everyone in that same method, process, procedure, and everyone will be okay when they get to the end. And if they don't, well, they'll probably be an outlier, and well, we don't really want them in our group because we don't really get results for people like that. So maybe there's something else for them. And I saw that when I was in rehab, and they were talking to me about how, oh, no, you'll be great. Actually, you're young, you're of working age, you're a father, you're all these things. You're the perfect candidate for rehab. And I'm like, what do you mean? There's people that are not the perfect candidate for rehab? If they wake up from stroke and they can't walk, they're a perfect candidate for rehab.
Yes.
But they're not. If they're older, if they're not of working age, and if they don't have the time to achieve recovery because of life expectancy, they don't get rehab.
Actually, when I was, I'll never forget this experience, and I saw the doctor recently, and I had this kind of crazy reaction. When I was in neurosurgery ward, so about 3 or 4 weeks after my operation, the rehab doctors came up to assess me. And I could do nothing. I was in my stroke chair. I could do nothing. And there were slight flickers in my right index finger. And 2 doctors came, the lead doctor and, the second in charge, because you work out hierarchy very quickly in the hospital system. Yeah. Anyway, the lead doctor just picked up my hand and she said, well, she can't do anything. She can't do anything. And I'm sitting there thinking, lady, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't react. And then the younger doctor, he was lovely. He said, oh, why don't we just add it to the waiting list? It takes a while to get into the rehab ward anyway. And she said, yeah, whatever, if you want, kind of thing. And yeah, I just was like,
Mm.
I when she walked away, because I had a letterboard, I actually signed to my father, "Does that woman have a brain injury?" Like, she was so I couldn't believe that you could treat other human beings like that,
Yeah.
let alone, especially if you're a rehab doctor and you actually see human beings in these states all the time.
How did it
Um,
make you feel at the time? I know you couldn't believe it. It was shocking, but like on an emotional level, how did it make you feel in that vulnerable time?
just like I was nothing. I had this overwhelming feeling that I had it anyway. Maybe it was part of the stroke and part of the craniotomy, and I had this overwhelming feeling that the world needed to get rid of me,
Mm.
and that, probably came from the delusions I was having in ICU as well, and the things I thought that everyone was trying to kill me. And so when she said that, it just perpetuated that feeling. Like I'm kind of scrap that they just need to push to the side, kind of
Mm.
thing.
Just can't feel it
Um,
anyway.
yeah. And I would say that even was perpetuated in the early days of rehab, not by the allied health, they were great, the physios and occupational therapists and everything, but the doctor a little bit. Like, because I couldn't really talk yet, he talked to my husband all the time, who actually, English is his second language. So I thought, bro, you can talk to me. I probably understand more of what you're saying because you're using medical jargon and blah, blah, blah. He kept talking to my husband. And then as my voice came back, because it slowly came back more and more every week, I saw his gaze shift to me more
Mm.
and more. And I
Mm.
thought, you don't even realize that you've just done that,
Mm.
you know? And, to some extent, every human does that. We all seek some sort of reaction, but I think if you're in that space, you've got to be super aware of it.
Yeah. Your patient has to be part of the conversation and they have
Yeah.
to be part of it, whether they can speak or not. I remember doctors coming into my ward at the beginning and talking about me in groups of tens or something and leaving.
Yes.
Oh, hey, hang on a sec. What do you mean? What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing all the time talking about me and then leaving? Hey, Bill, how you going? How about that? How about how are you
Mm,
today?
mm.
Anything, I don't know, just acknowledge me. Pretend I'm in the room when you're talking about me. It's not a photo that you're looking at. But look, I get it. I think these conversations that you and I have, many people experience similar things. And I think it's changing with the new guard. And I say the new guard because doctors, once they become doctors, they can be there for 80 years. So by the time you shift those types of mentalities, it takes a long time. But there's new doctors coming in that are very switched on, who will be around, who will be influencing their newer colleagues. And I think everyone's moving towards that more holistic approach anyway. And
Mm,
at least children, before they go into medical school, are thinking in that manner. They're thinking in the overall picture. And then they're learning a tool which is helping them help people, but they have this ideology which is a more of a holistic ideology. At least that's my hallucination. That's what I reckon is happening. But look, I might be
I
wrong.
have to say that I think there was a really big difference, and I noticed this early on, between the doctors who had met me before the operation. So the whole army of neurosurgeons, they met me before, that admitted me, um, and then this disaster had happened, and then they saw me afterwards.
Mm.
They were actually much more empathetic. Like, probably they were quite, you know, upset by what had happened, and I'm sure there'd been a big debrief and blah blah blah. Yeah, they were quite good, and it made me think. Even at that time, it made me think about the importance of, like, some sort of connection with a human being,
Mm.
and then seeing them in a really vulnerable state, as opposed to people that just walked in once they met me as, like, post-stroke Hannah kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just another, number on the ward, or,
Mm.
that kind of thing. I have to say the allied health professionals were generally really good.
Yeah.
Like, you know, because obviously they work so much more intensely with people, not this sort of like in and out kind of thing.
It's interesting the things that we don't complain about in this country. We don't complain about the level of care. We don't complain about the amazing technology. We don't complain about any of the stuff that they do really, really well. Like, because We are so blessed in this country. We have free medical care, and it doesn't matter almost what's wrong with you. You'll get it for free if you can't afford to pay for it. I think that's amazing. But most of the conversation is about the way people are treated by other people in hospital who should know better. And that's a really massive conversation, because I think that's where the work needs to be done. But look, that being said, I can understand how doctors have a bad day, nurses have a bad day. I get it. And sometimes they're going to come across incorrectly. They can't please everybody, and not everyone's personalities match. So there's that as well. So I know anyone listening and watching, I know that it sounds like we're harping on this thing and we're being hard on them, but we're not. We're just sharing our emotional experience, and that's an important part of our healing and recovery. So that's why we do it. That's why we have these conversations, and that's
I have
why.
to say, like, while we're praising, the system is amazing. I mean, my first MRI was on Medicare because it was unexplained headache. The only thing I paid for was to see the neurosurgeon, and even on that, there's a Medicare rebate. I think I only paid a couple of $100. And then the MRI to get the GPS coordinates that they need to where they need to go in was on Medicare. The craniotomy was on Medicare, which I don't even know how much those cost, probably about $100,000 or something.
Yep.
And then, I was in ICU for 2 weeks. I was in neurosurgery ward for 2 weeks. I was in rehab for 3 months.
Yep.
And then I was in outpatient rehab for 18 months. So all the allied health, all the rehab was on, obviously the government purse pays. It's not free to the world. It's paid. Someone else pays. But I mean, I just think, especially for things like stroke and, how can there not be? How can people have to? There should not be a process where you have to decide financially whether or not you can afford to
Have brain surgery,
bring back function, basically. Yeah.
I know people struggle with that in other countries. I know in the States it's a big issue. People come home with $70,000-$80,000 medical bills that they've got to pay off the rest of their lives. So I get it. So we're lucky, and I'm blessed. I didn't pay for a single thing. I think I was only out of pocket over the 7 years that I've been going through this. I was only ever out of pocket maybe $500-$600 in total. And I had an MRI every month. At the beginning, it was monthly. It was weekly for about 4 weeks. Then it was fortnightly. Then it was monthly, and that went on for about 6 months. So just the cost of that would have been extraordinary. And then brain surgery and all the stuff that goes after that, all free. But that being said, just in case anyone's going, well, I want to live in that country, our taxes are high, so we pay a lot of tax. And there's 75,000 different types of taxes, but you
get good services.
You get good services out of them. We kind of appreciate the services, and that's where they come from. So it's pretty cool. You've been on the media recently. I saw you on national television. Tell me a little bit about that.
Was that?
I saw you on a media article, didn't I?
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh my God. Sorry. I wrote an article in the Sydney paper. It's kind of a big paper in Australia. Just reflecting on, I mean, it's really interesting because I think with stroke, it's such a learning journey. So I say to people, like, when they're 2 months out and they're despairing, I say, look, it's just break time down to really small chunks. It's just like things unfold continuously. So one of the things that unfolded for me that I was really conscious of at the end of 2018 was like ableism. So I would say on the disability continuum, I'm fairly functional. I have some deficits. I can do stairs at a push, but I prefer not to. And I find going up much easier than going down. And it depends on the nature of the stair, if it's deep or wide or anyway. And the thing I became really conscious of was just like, even in 2019, well, that was 2018, the new buildings are being built with stairs. I just find this bizarre. Like, I kind of can forgive a building that's, from 1955 or something, like when, there was no protocols. But I just find, I just find, what people who are, when I say this to people who are perfectly able-bodied, I say, look, the building is basically saying stay out. And they're like, no, that's not what people mean. And I'm like, well, on some level it is. Like, you're not creating a place where all people can go. And, like I said, there's a real continuum of disabilities, but do your research. Like, it's not that hard.
You raise a really valid point, because so in a multi-level building, they have lifts or elevators to support people who need to go up and can't use stairs because they've got to get to the 30th floor. But if you're disabled, that's a great service. That's a great thing. You drive your electric wheelchair in, for example, or you push yourself in your regular wheelchair, you go up, and it's awesome. You get to the 30th floor, no effort. But in a fire, you're not allowed to use the fire escape. Beg your pardon, you're not allowed to use the elevator or the lift. You have to use the stairs. How the heck are you supposed to get out?
Exactly. And even just, cafes, like, they just have like one step at the front. Like, it's not even like a whole flight. I just think, look, it would have been really easy to level that. Like, I saw a cafe that was built last year and they had this one stair at the front, and I was like, and it would have been fairly inexpensive. I can't imagine it cost that much to create a,
just one smooth entrance, just a smooth entrance. No, nothing.
So, people might be able to get into their home because they've probably modified it themselves, but it's also about access to public buildings and, making the world as accessible for people as possible so that you see these people, so that they participate. Like,
So how was it received? How was the article received?
It was good, I think, from the disability group. I must say I made one faux pas, which was good that someone told me because I didn't realize. So because my disability is, visible, I get a lot of, not so much now, but because I can talk more, but I get a lot of people assuming that I am deficient mentally,
intellectually
like
disabled.
They had to talk to me really slow and, patronize me. And so I made one comment about being treated like an imbecile, which, as someone rightly pulled me up, said is actually ableist language, because that's derogatory to people that have mental, intellectual disabilities. So that was the other thing, and that was, a good call anyway. But no, it was well received, and I think one of the things the stroke unleashed, which is possibly an upside, is I have enough emotional filters to know what to say and what not to say, but something is slightly off. So I almost feel like I'm in a film sometimes and say I want to say something, and I go, no, Hannah, people don't say that. So the automatism, or whatever the word is, of my emotional regulation is a little bit gone, But in some ways it's an upside, because it means that I feel everything so intensely. So it means that I feel love and sadness and everything quite intensely. And, it's quite nice to feel that intensely sometimes.
Can I give you my version of that experience?
Yeah.
Okay. I reckon I discovered my heart and my gut when my head completely switched off. And it was as a result of having to find another way to continue on the planet with your head not working, because after my second bleed, I lost my ability to type an email, to remember what I was doing, to remember why I started something, to finish a sentence. I couldn't drive, I couldn't work. There's a lot of things I couldn't do. I'm not visibly affected by my stroke. People can't see it, but it was a lot of mental, cognitive impairments. And at that time, I started to notice this really strange sensation in my chest. It was like this thing was happening in my chest, and it was like painful, and it was weird, and I was like, what's going on? It was my heart. Like, I actually started to notice that I had a heart there, and it was beating, and it was reacting to different emotions and feelings and experiences. And I only think that was possible because my head was offline. So I get what you're saying, and I do experience emotions now. I thrive on that. I experience them greater, and I'm more loving and caring and kinder. And I say I love you, and I hug people, and I say sorry. So that's my experience. Is there yours something similar, or do you also have like, what else is it for you?
Well, so when I was saying that, what I was saying was that in the article, I was quite direct, and so that I think that puts people off a little bit, but in some ways, it's just what everyone's thinking anyway.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a case of, I say to people, I've got every characteristic I used to have.
Yep.
So none of my personality or cognitive abilities have changed, but everything is on steroids.
Yeah.
Everything is times by about 1,000.
Right.
So I was always a fairly direct person. Now I'm really direct.
Yeah.
I was always a pretty affectionate person. Now I probably kill my family with affection.
Yeah.
I was always a pretty empathetic person. Now I feel like I have like a sixth sense. If you're talking to me and feeling something and hiding it from me, I can kind of tell. And so it's kind of powerful. Like, it feels very powerful. It's a little bit tiring. Like, it's tiring to live in the world so intensely. But I was an extrovert anyway, so it's not like I don't enjoy picking up people's energy and stuff like that. So that's probably handy. Lucky I was an introvert.
It's enhanced your spidey senses.
Yeah. So actually, it's probably something that gives me quite a bit of energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And so when I say, you asked me before, about being thankful for the stroke, I think that's a very multi-dimensional statement, and I feel like it's only a statement that people that have had strokes can give.
Yeah.
Let's
talk about that.
Yeah.
So I put it out there. That stroke's the best thing that happened to me. It wasn't, obviously, at the beginning. There was no way I could relate to stroke as the best thing ever. But then when I reflect on how it's changed me, and not physically, and not how it's changed me for the better, and I reflect on that, and I think about how rich my life is now, and I'm not talking about money. I think about how stroke is one of the best things that ever happened to me, and a lot of people relate to that. So how do you relate to that part of it? Which, if at all, is that something that you can say, firstly?
I don't know if I can fully say it yet. I'm only 2 years post, but I can see myself saying it probably further down the track. And I guess in some ways, 2 years post, I can say it in some regards. Okay. So I don't think you...
Tell me in what regard you can say it.
I think the stroke has given me, well, what happened basically has given me, I said to someone the other day, it gives me feelings of intense sadness, because I hear about a lot of people that have craniotomies for meningiomas that are perfectly fine. And I think, well, why couldn't I have just had a perfectly fine craniotomy? But it gives me intense gratitude as well. So I could have died in that operation. That was a very real risk. I could have died 24 hours later. I could have stayed locked in for the rest of my life. So I think, and also I think, I'd been to hospital twice to have both my kids. That was basically it. And I think, spending that much time in hospital, especially on a rehab ward, you see the possibilities of what can happen to human beings. And it's it's not pretty. And I think, I got off pretty light, really. Like, when people my like friends of mine who, have never been into a hospital or whatever, they say to me, "Oh, like it's just massive what you went through." And I feel like saying, "Do you want me to tell you the possibilities?" Like, oh no, this could be a really
Mm,
depressing conversation about what could actually happen.
mm.
Um, so I think, and to some extent, you can only have that level of gratitude by having such a horrendous experience.
Okay.
So
So
I
gratitude. So gratitude's important. It's one of those things that enhances your life I feel like when you become grateful. As
yeah.
and you said you're not quite there yet to say, so gratitude isn't enough. It's not enough just to be grateful, to look back and go, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. Um, Other things have to happen and you're not there yet.
Well, I guess in some ways the jury's out on whether I lost my whole career. So I am back at work, but the career I'm not back. I mean, not back in the sense I'd like to be.
Yeah.
Now, I guess I placed a lot of importance on that, which could have been misguided as well, and maybe that's the journey for me as well. Is that you know these things that we hold on to quite tightly in this life, like
Mm,
career and prestige and all that kind of stuff, maybe that doesn't matter at all.
mm,
And to some extent, I've made some peace, but I guess if that pans out as it may, I'm not quite sure how I will react to that. I mean,
mm.
probably how I've reacted to everything so far. I'll just morph and change and evolve, and but I think that takes a bit longer. I think that
Okay.
will take.
I hear
Yeah.
you. I tend to agree. I hear you. So maybe I couldn't say that for a number of years until I got to the point where I looked back and enough had changed and I had evolved enough and I had done
Yeah.
enough uh, work to accept, overcome, learn,
Mm.
what have you, reorganize myself. And then when I got there, then I was able to say, wow, if it wasn't for this thing that happened in my head, I'll
Yeah.
be the same dumb
Exactly.
man that I was back then. And I was
Working
a
60, 70 hours a week, and
yeah,
like
yeah. And I was a good
Yeah.
man. I was just a bit dumb. And and that I and that's part of what brings me to be able to say that. There's many other things, but that's part of it. So I get why you're saying you're not there yet. And that's pretty cool. That's fine. No worries at all. So what kind of work were you doing beforehand?
um, I work for the government, so I was posted overseas. So I was expecting to keep doing that. Like we had a plan. My husband is fairly happy to go wherever. We had a plan that we'd just keep on posting. So I thought I'd have the operation in May 2017 and I'd apply for a posting in the July. That was my
Mm,
plan.
nice.
Well, I was still in hospital. I was still in hospital in July. Um, so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what will happen. I say to people, it's funny because people at work, it's the kind of workplace where, everyone's got a plan and everything's fairly set. And people say to me, "Oh, so when will rehab end?" And I'm like, there isn't really an end.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big question mark. And I find that lots of people find that concept really difficult to understand. And they just kind of look at you and then look back at their computer. Like, they can't really cope with that uncertainty, but actually because you've lived with it for a couple of years now, longer if it's longer, you've actually accepted it to some degree.
Mm,
And so often you find yourself counseling people around you
mm,
because other people are like, "I don't even know how you deal with that." And it's like,
mm.
well, you haven't dealt with it, so of course you don't know, but
Yeah.
should you have to deal with it, you'll probably find a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
um so yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I find that whole timeline thing is interesting because
Yes.
people they go to work, they work from this point on the day to that point in the day. They
Mm.
go to wherever and they get this and then they go out at that time. They go to uni or college, they get a degree and it starts in year one and it ends in year four. So they have all these time constraints on everything. You build a house, it takes 9 months. You do this, it does that. So when they come into rehab, they think, oh, okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to rehab, we'll get that person well, and then they'll go home and everything will be fine. Or
Yeah.
some people don't get well, and therefore rehab is never never ends. It continues. Stroke tends to be, for the majority of the people that I've spoken to, a lifelong recovery afterwards. And if you're not recovering from the physical part of it, you're recovering from the emotional part of it, or a combination of both. And I keep having this conversation with, talking about people who are in wheelchairs and people who are feeling, who have a more dramatic uh, physical deficit than you and I. You see them, and they might be happy-go-lucky, but they're in a wheelchair that they weren't in before, and whatever's happening to them, and just because they're in a wheelchair and they appear happy and they're rolling around and they can get places, doesn't mean that they're not actually dealing with something really dramatic. They're not dealing with pain. They're not dealing with cramps. They're not dealing with all the stuff that we can't see. And it has just only occurred to me in the last 2 or 3 months, and I've spoken about it on a number of episodes recently, that people in wheelchairs are not just people who can't walk. They are people who have pain and suffering and other issues to deal with. So hopefully what you're able to do by having those conversations is just shed some light. But you're right, they don't have the reference points in the past, in their past experience, to understand the concept of ongoing recovery. It's like learning. Learning should be ongoing. It shouldn't end after 4 years when you get your degree. Now you're qualified, go and get a job. Well, the learning continues in the job, and so does the recovery from something serious like stroke. And I talk about stroke, but something serious like cancer recovery, something serious like, heart attack, it doesn't matter what it is, an amputation, it doesn't end. It's ongoing.
And I think when you say stroke is the best thing that happened to me, I think that gaining of that wisdom is probably the best thing that happened to me. And I think that it can only happen through something dramatic, whatever that is, whether it be a stroke or something else. And so I really don't like motherhood statements like, oh, this is for the best, or, people that love telling you this and, have never had anything in their life. But I do like a much more nuanced conversation about the fact that there's only certain wisdom that you gain from horrendous experience.
Correct.
And I'm grateful for that wisdom, because it, it illuminates so much in my life.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a necessary evil, I guess, is what you call it. I don't know if evil is the right word, but it's a bit of it's necessary to
experience. It's a necessary experience. If anyone ever said to me, what happened to you is for the better early on, they probably would have had a black eye. No chance. Don't tell me it's for the better and there's a lesson to learn. I'm interested in learning lessons like this. But down the track, maybe there's a lot of lessons that I learned from it. Maybe I learned not to be such a hothead, not to be such so dramatic in the way that I did the bad, or so good at doing the bad things. I was really good at doing terrible things to myself. And by terrible, I'm talking about overworking, smoking, drinking, just I was really good at all the negative stuff. Now I'm really good at all the opposite stuff. It's the same energy, but it's for a good cause.
Yeah.
It's just more wisdom. It's given me greater wisdom, and I never thought that I'd be able to get wisdom from that experience, but I can see now how it can get there. And motherhood statements usually come from people who haven't had a lot of life experience, and are just hoping to project in a positive way and to make somebody feel well. And I love why they're doing it. I love that they're doing it because they intend to do well and to make you feel okay, but it's not really useful at the time. There's the right time for everything, and that's not the right time at the beginning.
I have this argument with some people sometimes because they say, oh, you should be kinder, people mean well. And I said, look, I think most humans mean well. I think that's a general law of humanity, is most humans are well-intentioned. But that doesn't mean that I can't tell them about how that makes me feel, and for them to maybe learn something from that discussion. So I don't think we should just think, oh, people mean well, oh, therefore I have to shut up. Like, this life is a process of learning. So, you know, for like that woman who pulled me up on the ableist language in the article, I'm glad she did that. I needed to learn that. I need to understand better those words and the language that's appropriate to use. And so, if someone's had an experience that you haven't had, then maybe you should just listen to that experience. You shouldn't dish out a motherhood statement, and that goes for all experiences. Like, it's opened my mind a lot to experiences of race. You know, like, as a white person, I don't know how people of color experience the world. Maybe I should listen to how they experience the world. Like, that might be, you know, or someone that's gay or something. You know, like, it's really important that people don't just stamp their assumptions about those people onto them and actually listen to their story.
Yeah, go to an Asian country and be the only white person. Go to a African country and be the only white person. You'll get to know how people experience racism in Australia. Like, it's the same over there. The same negative way of doing things in countries like, you know, anywhere else where the majority rules. That's the experience, and we're just grateful. We're just lucky that we haven't had that experience, and therefore we can't relate to it, and therefore we try to you know, it's not really that bad. We really mean well. It's just a joke, you know, it doesn't matter. But if there's a fly on your hand and somebody has a hammer and they go to shoo that fly with the hammer and they hit your hand, they meant well, but it's not the right way to go about meaning well. It's meaning well has to have the actions that are associated to the correct outcome. And if you mean, just because you mean something to be a great outcome, but you're using the wrong tool to deliver that outcome, well, that's no point in that. There's no point in attempting to mean well while using like a sledgehammer to shoo a fly. It doesn't work. So you've got to adjust. People need to adjust their method for delivering their well-intentioned comment. That's what you're doing by telling people, and I don't think it's a problem. And if they do abreact, I think it's a bigger issue on their part rather than on me triggering that. If they're being triggered by me saying, you shouldn't say that to somebody who's X, well, then you know what? That's maybe something that they needed to hear, and maybe they've never been told before. And if they've never been told, they'll never have a point in life to start understanding why something is not appropriate. I have certain friends that can call me certain names, but you can't do that.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the context by which they have permission to do that. It doesn't make it right just because you heard somebody say something to me that you can say that. You don't understand where it's coming from, and your delivery might be perceived by me in a way that offends or hurts, etc. So it's a really deep conversation, and I'm glad that you tell people what you notice and what you see, because the people that you're intending to do well to really need more people sticking up for them, so to speak, or more people speaking out on their behalf. That's what we really need to do. We need to really create a conversation. So keep doing what you're doing and learn the lessons. And it's so great that you can take it on the chin, so to speak. You know, when somebody says, that's not how you speak, you're sounding like just a regular person who's speaking that way. That's great. That's how you learn. That's how feedback helps make your message tighter and more impactful, because you take that out and now you bring together the entire community. Says, wow, Hannah's one of us, she's one of them, she's whoever she is, but she speaks really well on our behalf. And that's what we want. We want people to speak well on our behalf when we can't. So what type of work do you do now, Hannah? I'm
doing the same. So basically,
but not,
it's a massive.
not,
Yeah,
sorry?
it's a big government department. Like, there's 7,000 employees. So
Okay.
it's not like they can't find you a job that, it's more that for me, the interesting work was overseas and the work that I was interested in.
Right.
So it's not like I didn't expect to, of course, to do some Canberra time, but I don't know how long it will be for, basically. Because the thing about going overseas too is you have to work full time, and I'm not sure. I mean, even though I'm back at work, I'm not back full time.
Right.
So, and also there's a opportunity cost because I need to continue rehab, so I can't work full time. But maybe in 5 years, I will have integrated work enough into my workday that I can. I mean, so integrated rehab enough into my workday that um I can work full time. But the problem is, so there was a stroke, but there's also quite a bit of residual tumor, so they didn't get it all. They stopped once I had the bleed, which I'm glad they did, because they can do more damage, and it's growing again. So that's also something I have to deal with at the moment. So it'll be nice to just have to deal with the stroke rehab and not think about the tumor. But no, it decided to grow again. I figure that everything has a will to live. So but it's growing slow. I mean, I'm not symptomatic. It's growing slowly. So there's a few options on the table. So I have to go and see a few specialists and see what those are, but frankly I'd just prefer not to think about it.
Yeah, if that works for now, why not?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I say to people. They're like, oh, when are you going to see specialists? And I'm like, oh, in July. And they're like, is that soon enough? And I'm like, yeah. And I feel good today, so let's just think about today. I feel good right now.
Yeah, small chunks.
And then when I have a conversation with them, then I'll think about what is going to happen in the future, and that kind of thing. So yeah, small talk.
Yeah, and there's no point trying to worry about things that are going to happen in the future that may not even happen. You don't even know, really. So we just best to just, because that creates anxiety, it's best to just do what you can with what you've got right now, and then as things present themselves, and deal with them when they come. That's what we do every other time. We don't normally try to anticipate every single thing that's about to occur or may occur. We just go for it, and then when it occurs, we deal with it.
Yeah, anxiety is an interesting issue because before the operation, I actually had I had what they call generalized anxiety disorder, pretty chronic anxiety. I functioned fine, but I had this constant anxiety, and it was that constant projection about the future. And I think since the operation, it's changed somewhat. So I don't think about those things in the future. I think I hold much more lightly to things that are going to happen in the future. So I like that analogy of holding tight and holding light. But I do, it's probably lessened now, but straight after the stroke and probably for a year, I had a lot of fear around day-to-day events, like getting in the car, crossing the road, because I think I've become aware of how quickly life can change. And I would say with time that's lessened a bit, but it's still always in the back of my mind. Like if I get home after, just go to the shops, I always just say a little like, thank you under my breath, like that nothing happened to us in the car. Like it's just sort of, or if I wake up in the morning, I think, oh, I'm still here.
Yeah, it sounds like a little gratitude practice. It sounds like that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. I remember the same anxiety learning to walk again, and I had an amazing therapist, and he goes to me, so what else do you want to be able to do? And I said, run. And he said, okay, what for? Sport, this, that? I said, no, just to get across the road. So if a car's coming, I can get out of the way.
Yeah.
So that was an anxiety that I had, and that was something that I needed to deal with. But it wasn't a debilitating anxiety. It was just like, oh my, if I get stuck in the middle of the road and there's a car coming, I can't run away.
Yeah.
It's not good. I've got to resolve that issue.
Yes. Yes. Crossing roads makes me feel a bit anxious. You're very focused. Like it's as soon as that green man goes off, you've got to
bang like a sprinter, like a sprinter.
Yeah.
if you can run that fast. But the other thing about what you're saying is I have a little gratitude thing that I do at night before I go to bed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I do a little thank you for my family, and then I name all the people, and then when it gets to too many people. I say thank you for that family and thank you for those people. I try not to use every single name for everybody that I've ever met, but I do that, and I appreciate being around them. And thank you for having them at my house for my birthday and all that kind of stuff. And it only takes about 30 seconds or a minute, but I say it in my mind. I say it quietly, and it allows me to wake up in the morning looking forward to having interactions with people again and starting the whole thing. And tonight when I go to bed, I'll say thanks for Hannah.
Thanks for the interview.
Yeah, thanks for sharing and all that type of thing. And I just feel like it makes me feel a little bit like it makes me feel like I was also present in that day, and that I noticed the things that I experienced, which was great, because many times somebody would say, "You remember when we went there to that place and did that thing?" And I'm going like, "Well, were we together a couple of days ago?" Yes, man. Weren't we together? So I like what you do. I like how you've come through this, and I love how you're looking forward to the future, or not looking forward to it. And I'm not saying in the future, or as in not projecting forward, I suppose is the better word. And that's a great thing. You got your children, or is it just one or two children?
Two, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about the children. How old are they?
10 and 8. So, actually, that was funny because when I was in hospital, just quite soon after, I had this intense feeling of gratitude, like, thank God they're not tiny. Because I've got friends, still having babies, but they were, 8 and 6 at the time or something. So, and I just remember, like, with this level of disability, like, thank God they can feed themselves and dress themselves. And so yeah, they've been good. I think to some extent the recovery has been good for them because they just assume it will continue. They don't have the level of scientific knowledge to understand the nuances. And that's good. I remember the first time they saw me in hospital, I couldn't do anything. I could see them and I could feel for them, but I couldn't physically do anything. And they were quite taken aback. I remember my daughter's face, especially. She's the younger one. And she said to me later, you looked like you, but you weren't you. And I think, that was really tough. But my husband was around and my parents were around and my siblings were around, and I do have an amazing network of friends that I've actually kept, nearly all of them. It's quite phenomenal. And yeah, I just think, they were pretty well looked after, and I think they've dealt with it pretty well.
Yeah. Hannah, that's awesome. On that note, thank you for being on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. If somebody wanted to connect with you because they relate to your story or they've had something similar happen, is there somewhere where they can go and do that?
So I actually have a blog. It's www.hannahderwent.com. My name is HANNAHDERWENT. And I think they can find the way to contact me on there.
I'll have that link in the show notes, so anyone wants to contact Hannah, go there.
And they can also contact me through my Instagram if they want.
Yep, we'll put a link to that as well.
Yeah.
Well done. Congratulations on your recovery so far. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to just hearing more about how your recovery is coming along. And
I'm excited to see how it unfolds. It's amazing that you can have a tumor growing in your brain, but your brain can still recover. The brain is just phenomenal.
Yeah, we are. We are totally phenomenal. And it can recover. And then you can also adapt, like your eyes have adapted to the way that vision is for you now. We can adapt, and I understand, some of the struggles that some people have to deal with that they can't adapt to. and I get, the extreme part of what stroke can be. There's a lot of us that are not in the extreme, but humans and just animals, all species on this planet are good at adapting. So if you're going through this right now and you're feeling like it's really, really tough, just know that if you have a goal that you set your mind to, your body, your brain will find a way to support you to get there. If you just stay the course. And we don't have a lot of stroke patients don't have, or survivors don't have our option but to stay the course. And I know it's hard, but I just want to offer hope. And that's part of what I'm going to do. So what I'm doing with the podcast, I'm going to stop talking because now I'm struggling to put it into words. So just thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
And all the best.
Discover how to support your recovery after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com.